Hi everyone. My name is Rachel and I work for LICA out of Bonnieville. I'm so honored to be here with you on Treaty 6 territory. I am also extremely apologetic that I could not attend live. As you're listening to this, I'm probably doing a presentation at our AGM. But thank you so much for taking the time to come to these wonderful open houses anyway, as they're hosted by Healthy Waters Lac La Biche. Your support is really what is making our stewardship possible, so thank you. This evening, we're going to focus on water governance in Alberta. So how water is managed, who are the major players doing that management? And we will take a special look at Wpacs. That's where the title comes from, what Wpacs do for you. And that's because that is what LICA is, we're Wpac. We also want to share with you the ways that we can help you improve environmental sustainability on your land. So including some funding opportunities as well. Stay tuned for that. So just to get us started, a little bit about our organization. So LICA is a community-based not-for-profit association that is a synergy group, meaning we bring stakeholders together to discuss energy and development in our area. We're the Watershed Planning and Advisory Council, or Wpac, for the Beaver River watershed. We're going to get into that in a little bit. And we're an airshed zone. And as such, we operate a really impressive air quality monitoring network in our region. So LICA focuses on environmental monitoring, environmental management, and community education and outreach. That's what I do as the education and outreach coordinator. Our vision, mission, and values are really what guides our work and gives you a better sense of our organizational goals. So I'll just quickly read those to you. So our vision, the environment in the LICA region is ecologically healthy and sustainable. Our mission, LICA collects, shares, and acts upon data, traditional knowledge, and information relevant to the environment. And this will be achieved through scientific study, community engagement, and meaningful partnerships. And finally, our values. So we connect stakeholders and promote community involvement. We provide timely, defensible, and accessible data. We educate the community advocating for environmental stewardship, and we responsibly manage our resources to achieve our vision and our mission. So here's just a quick outline of what we're going to cover today. Like I said, we're going to speak about water governance, and we're going to be paying special attention to the Water Act and the Water for Life strategy. We'll then move on to how this actually gets done in real life, how the strategies are actually implemented and achieved through the Wpacs and our partners, and we'll save funding and educational opportunities that you can take part in for last. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to bring to the forefront as we're talking about water as a natural resource, just some things to keep in mind. So all life depends on water. We all need it to survive. Human bodies are between 60 to 70% water, depending on your age, gender, what scientist you're asking. Plants also need water, and our wildlife needs water as well. So it's really essential to our quality of life that we have dependable quality water available. At the same time, water is also necessary for our highly developed society to function. So we need water in our homes for them to be livable. Water is necessary for industry to extract oil and gas, for example, or for fisheries, or for any other sector that's employing us and our neighbors. So again, our quality of life is only as good as the quality and the quantity of our fresh water. Next, water is a finite resource. So we're really fortunate to live in such a water-rich country. Canada is holding more than 1/5 of the world's fresh water. And when we look at that number, we understand why we don't think too hard about how much water we're using every day because we're surrounded by it. That being said, we only get so much rain every year. We only get so much snow melt, glacier melt, etc. And if we were to give out water licenses to everyone who asked for one, we would deplete our water supply very, very quickly. On top of that, treating the wastewater that comes out of that scenario also becomes very expensive very quickly. So it's really best to think about water as a finite resource that needs judicious management and very involved management as opposed to a renewable. And then to build on that point, we see a lot of disparity about where our water supply is located and where demand is located. So 80% of the water supply is in the north and 80% of the water demand is actually in the south. Southern Alberta really struggles with drought during the summer months. I'm sure you all know that. It's mainly due to geography, climate, natural hydrological factors, so aka quote unquote natural factors, but that doesn't really alleviate the strain on families, on agriculture, on industry when the water does become scarce. So while we live in the aptly named Lakeland, it's important to keep in mind that this really is not the reality across the province. Next, with climate change, that point goes for double. Our water resources are going to become very challenged in the coming years, and our allocation is going to become a lot more difficult to do. And then lastly, I just want to give you some context about where our water is allocated in Alberta. So that's the graph. The vast majority of it is allocated to irrigation. That's followed by cooling, used in commercial power plants. Then the third is municipal water supply. So irrigation, cooling, and then municipal water supply are our biggest allocations. You'll also notice that we mainly pull surface water. That's about 97% of all of our water needs. And we really don't pull a whole lot from groundwater. It's only making up about 3% of our water needs. So there's just some context around water in Alberta that you can rely on as we move through the presentation. So let's get into it. Water governance in Alberta. So starting off, let's talk about the different legislation that affects water. So there's 9 different acts up on the screen. Some are provincial, some are federal, and it's a lot to sift through. And really, these are just the most relevant pieces of legislation. It's not all of the legislation that mentions water. So starting with provincial legislation directly regulates water and land use in Alberta. These things, water and land use, they really go hand in hand because there's not a single land use that doesn't affect the surrounding water bodies. So you really have to legislate things on them together. So moving through these different acts, the Land Stewardship Act, this gives the government the tools to enact the land use framework. So the land use framework, is the government's approach to managing public and private lands and natural resources to achieve long-term economic, environmental, and social goals. So essentially, this is kind of our long-term development plan for the province. Following that, we have EPA, the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act. This one allows the government to develop regulations, standards, guidelines, and ambient objectives to protect Alberta's land, air, and water. And it also gives the power to the government to perform environmental assessments, environmental impact assessments on developments of a certain size and a certain type that are listed in the Act. These are called designated activities. Next, we have the Public Lands Act. This one regulates the allocation, the transfer, and the sale of public land. It also regulates how public lands can be used. This is actually particularly important in a water context because it does regulate shorelines and riverbeds. So the land that's like directly adjacent to a water body or the bottom of an ephemeral water body, that's all provincial land. Then lastly, we have the Water Act. This is the most direct legislation affecting water in the province. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Additionally, there is a couple pieces of federal legislation to consider. So firstly, the Fisheries Act, Migratory Birds Convention Act, Species at Risk Act, the Navigable Waters Protection Act. All of these give federal jurisdiction to these specific topics. So they're pretty self-explanatory. And these acts also apply whether or not they're on federal land. So we do have to follow them, whether or not we are in a national park, on reserve, etc. Next, we have the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. This is analogous to a PIA, but it's at the federal level. So it gives the federal government environmental assessment power over certain designated activities. So moving into the most important one, the Water Act. So how did this piece of legislation evolve? The first law passed in this country regulating water was the Northwest Irrigation Act of 1894. So that's a federal piece of legislation. And it gave the Dominion of Canada control over the surface water throughout the country and the ability to allocate it. In 1930, jurisdiction of the natural resources were devolved to the provinces, that sort of separation of powers. So Alberta created its own water legislation, the Water Resources Act, in 1931. They then passed another law in 1953, that's the Groundwater Control Act. Remember that the laws above were only dealing with surface water, so an additional act was necessary to control groundwater. And then in 1962, the Water Resources Act was amended to include groundwater. And then we get to the Water Act, 1999. It's been amended a few times since then, but the core legislation essentially remains the same. So the Water Act governs water licenses and approvals, aka water use in the province, water resource planning, and it implements standards for water and wastewater systems. And the goal of the Act is really to promote conservation and the wise allocation and use of water. So that's a direct quote. Other goals are to promote economic growth and sustainability by making sure our water resources are dependable, and to protect existing water rights as well. So how does this play out? What are the principles of the Act? Well, the Act says that the Crown owns all the water in the province, even on private land, and in order to use that water, you need a license. Obviously, you aren't carrying around a water license in your wallet. This is because your municipal government is holding a license for all of its residents and manages the water use at a municipal level. And that's true for about 90% of Albertans. Households that are not hooked up to municipal water are allowed to withdraw up to 1,250 cubic meters of water a year without a license. And then anything else, any sort of industrial, agricultural, commercial water use needs a water license in order to divert that water out of our water bodies. The Act works on the principle of first in time, first in right, meaning that if a water shortage conflict arises, the user holding the oldest license gets seniority. Exceptions to this, so household use takes top priority no matter what. If a water license is going to divert your household water, that's not acceptable. Next, traditional agricultural users are also protected, but this is a very small group of people who had to have been diverting water prior to 1999 when the Water Act came into effect, and they had to have registered their farm before 2003. And there's also exceptions, for example, for water for firefighting. These kind of emergency uses, those also take priority over water license allocations. So the Act allows users to appeal decisions made by AEP under the Water Act. So that goes for approvals, licenses, preliminary certificates, amendments, fines, penalties, enforcement orders. You can appeal all of those decisions to the Environmental Appeals Board if you are affected by a water decision. And water management plans can also be regulated by the province. So this is what happened in the South Saskatchewan River Basin with their water management plan, for example. So the Water for Life strategy. So Water for Life is the Government of Alberta's comprehensive water management policy. And this was set in 2003 after some really extensive public consultation, and then it was renewed in 2008. So it was determined that the province really needed an overarching response to these devastating multi-year droughts that happened in the really late 90s, early 2000s. So they did a lot of that consultation process, and Water for Life was born out of those consultations. So thinking about that, how is this different than the Water Act? So the Water Act gives the province ownership of the water and the right to allocate it, whereas the Water for Life strategy sets out the government's management goals and helps guide ministries when they are doing work that affects water. So really they're two kind of separate things. One is legislation giving the government powers, and one is kind of this guiding framework for water management. So the renewal of the strategy in 2008 set a 10-year plan to achieve short, medium, and long-term goals. And a lot of these goals have been met. And the Alberta Water Council, is working to develop a new Water for Life action plan for 2024 that realigns our goals with the needs of the province. So the Water for Life strategy has three main goals. The first being safe, secure drinking water, the second being healthy aquatic ecosystems, and the third being a reliable quality water supply for a sustainable economy. And it also has three directions. So knowledge and research, partnerships, and water conservation. So the directions, these are setting out the way to achieve these goals. They're the direction that all of our water partners are following in order to achieve the three goals of safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality water supplies. The top picture here shows a timeline of how the Water for Life strategy has progressed since implementation. So starting with the implementation in 2003, the Alberta Water Council was established in 2004. Policy was renewed in 2008. A new action plan was released in 2009. And then the government started doing some more consultation work to develop some new plans and new strategies 2013, and a comprehensive review was released again in 2014. And then on this right side picture here, the diagram, this shows the goals, so safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, reliable quality water supplies, along with some steps down here to achieve them, some targets. And I really like this picture because it shows how all of the goals are overlapping and how they all interconnect to achieve this healthy, secure, reliable water source. So that's kind of the gist of how water is governed by the province. And now we're going to move into what is a Wpac, who are our partners, how are we actually achieving these things on the ground. So on the last slide, I spoke about the three directions for Water for Life, one of which being partnerships. So the strategy sets out three different kinds of partnerships, very specific types of partnerships that are integral to achieving the three main goals of safe drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable water for economic sustainability. So each partnership type focuses on a different level of jurisdiction, from very broad to very local. So at the provincial jurisdiction level, we have the Alberta Water Council. This was formed in 2004 and it provides policy advice to the government and oversees implementation of Water for Life. So they're making sure that those targets are being achieved, and they're acting kind of like that watchdog. And then on the very local scale, we have Watershed Stewardship groups. That's like Healthy Waters, Moose Lake Management Society, Muriel Lake Basin Management Society, things of that nature. Then in the middle, we have Wpacs, which are operating on the watershed level. And you can see the different Wpacs that are in our province on the map on the right-hand side of the page. So Wpacs are independent nonprofit organizations. This brings a lot of credibility to the work that we do because we're not beholden to the government or to industry when we report our findings. So if we do monitoring and report on that monitoring, or if we gather information from the different WSGs in our area and bring all of that together, we're not beholden to the government or the industry side. And that makes our work very independent. So Wpacs are the main mechanism for bringing multi-sectoral stakeholders together at the watershed level to share resources, expertise, and knowledge. So we're bringing together municipalities, the provincial and the federal government, industry, agriculture, First Nations, community members, environmental nonprofit groups. We're bringing them all together to talk about the watershed and to make a plan moving forward. Wpacs develop local solutions so we get better management of our watershed, and we also act as an incubator for ideas and strategies to improve watershed management. And then lastly, because we act as that middleman, we're getting information from the local and from the provincial side. We can leverage those resources to accomplish more together than can be done individually. And then lastly, one of the big things that Wpacs do is we create these integrated watershed management plans. So again, bringing all of those stakeholders to the table to hammer out a plan for the watershed management that everybody can agree to and abide by. So what are the responsibilities of the Wpacs? So one, we act as conveners and collaborators. We bring stakeholders together from different sectors to get their input on what we're doing. We also develop those watershed management plans that I was talking about. We advise on policy. Thirdly, we do a lot of monitoring. We do a lot of assessment and reporting on the health of our watershed. And we also deliver education and literacy programs to different audiences. So children, adults, in the classroom or in the community. We're going to where the people are. And then what does that mean? What does that all mean put together? Well, we kind of act like a hub for the environmental community, the water community. We're bringing that kind of on the ground knowledge from our watershed stewardship groups. We're sharing it with all of our partners. And we're also offering our knowledge and our support to them. And then we're reporting on that state of the watershed with the input from all of the different sources. So how does that all get achieved? Well, like I said, we work collaboratively with our partners and our stakeholders. We bring everybody to the table and reach out to everybody who might be having an impact on the water to get their perspectives. And we seek consensus on land, water, resource management strategies to support the shared achievement of our shared environmental, social, economic goals and our outcomes. So by seeking consensus, we don't just ask for a 50% plus one majority understanding of our management plan. We really work to get everybody on board so that they can implement the management plan and feel good about it and feel like they contributed. We also work on a biased, balanced approach. So we work to fix the problems. We don't assign blame. What we do is we just focus on the problem and finding a solution to it, whether or not there's a very fixed cause for some of these problems. That's not our responsibility. We're here to fix the problem and create solutions. And then lastly, we provide science-based decision support tools for decision makers. So we can really dig into the science. We have that expertise available to us to give to the public, to give to our partners, to help them make scientifically sound decisions. So now that we've talked about what a Wpac is, what we're doing, we want to give you some opportunities. So let's go through some of those. So the funding opportunities on the screen here, these are for landowners and community groups that want to make a significant change in the environment. These applications can kind of be difficult to navigate if you don't have that background. And so we are more than happy to offer application support to you to get funding to make sustainability improvements on your land. This is just a handful of the funding opportunities that I know of. I'm sure there are more, but this really is just, there is a lot of opportunity out there and incentive to green your property. So moving through a couple of these, the Green Acreages project funding for property owners, we've done a lot of work with this. So if you have an acreage, a hobby farm, a recreational property, this is a really great funding opportunity for you. Watershed stewardship grants, those are from the Land Stewardship Center, and those are for community groups. We've had watershed stewardship groups in the past apply for funding to implement COLB, some of our campaigns. Next, we have our environmental farm plans. So if you enact an environmental farm plan, you become eligible for Canadian Agricultural Partnership funding, but you do need that farm plan to be eligible for it. And we can help you work through that process as well, or point you in the right direction to people who have completed them in the past. And then lastly, we have this kind of Ducks Unlimited funding. They do some revolving land and restoring wetland programs where they will give you money to put a conservation easement on your property, or do some kind of revolving your pasture, your grazing animals. So that's another really great opportunity, and to restore your wetlands as well. And then lastly, we have a lot of educational opportunities for you. That's my job. I offer educational opportunities to the public. And we have so many resources on our website. We have a lot of our data. We have to share it all. So that's all publicly published. If you ever have a question about the environmental history of a place or how it's currently doing, you can look into our data for that. We also teach workshops, or we invite experts to teach workshops and share their expertise as well. We also do a lot of water monitoring with our partners, and there is so much opportunity to learn how to do that every field season. So if you want to come out with us and learn how monitoring happens, we are so happy to have you. And there is always opportunity as well to provide input from the community on our IWMP, our Integrated Watershed Management Plan. And that's really an opportunity to make a huge difference in how your watershed is managed and how to share your concerns about the environment. So you really could have a seat at the table working with stakeholders to give your input on how the watershed will be managed moving forward. And this last bit, we're always here to support you. That's our job, that's our goal, is to support people in making environmentally sound decisions on their land. So any questions, any concerns that you have, we are more than happy to hear them and to try and find you some solutions if that's what you're looking for. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and for joining us at this open house. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'm more than happy to speak with you. My email is on the screen there, and our phone number, our office phone number as well. I really hope you learned something and you feel inspired by the way we manage to get involved and to share your views and incorporate some of these opportunities into your life. So once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a great evening.